LiSTNR production.
The internet changed the world forever, connecting us like never before, allowing unprecedented access to information and people around the world. For these reasons, it's been hijacked by criminals to infiltrate and commit heinous offences, leading to an explosion of organised crime. Dr. Dennis Desmond is a former FBI special agent and counterintelligence expert who's seen the darkest corners of the digital world. In this episode, he reveals how the sinister side of cryptocurrency and the dark web is creeping into the lives of ordinary civilians, and how one of the world's most downloaded phone apps is surveilling its users, putting them at risk of prosecution, particularly women. My name's Catherine Fox. I'm a former GP, crime author and screenwriter. I'm enthralled by forensics and have spent thousands of hours researching for books and screenplays. So I thought, why not turn my research into a podcast? Every week, you'll be joining me in discovering how forensic science is helping solve high-profile crimes in Australia and around the world.
Basically, you look at the internet, it's separated into different components. So we've got something called the surface net or surface web, and that's the stuff we typically see on a day-to-day basis. Those are all the social media sites, the public websites, news sites, sites that we go to where we want to learn more information. It's the way we typically interface with communications and information on a day-to-day basis. Within the internet, there's a large section called the deep web. And that deep web is all of those paywall protected areas, all the places that you can't necessarily go to unless you either pay for a subscription, have a username and password, or have permission to access, such as corporate networks or your health network. Well, there's another subset called the dark net or dark networks or dark web that is also part of the internet that is a compilation of sites that are encrypted, and you require a specialized browser in order to gain access to these sites. One of the major portions of the darknet is called the onion net, and it's accessed by the onion router, which is a special kind of Mozilla browser. What it does is when you identify a site which has an onion address that you're trying to get to, it actually goes through a series of nodes. And each node only knows what the next node is. It has encrypted the route from the entry point to the destination so that the entry point doesn't necessarily know where you're going. It only knows that there's another node that it has to connect to. This creates a relatively anonymous surfing environment for users to gain access to all these specialized encrypted sites that regular search engines won't index, regular search engines won't access, and people are generally unaware of this very complex encrypted ecosystem that is comprising the darknet. You've probably heard that this is where bad things happen. This is where criminals hang out, where drugs are sold, where weapons are sold. And yes, that is a large portion of the darknet, where people can access marketplaces that are very complex stores, either individual providers or vendors of different kinds of narcotics. For instance, in Australia, MDMA or ecstasy is probably the number one drug that's sold on these darknet drug marketplaces. But then you can also order weapons. You can buy stolen identity credentials, such as driver's licenses. You can have passports made. You can buy counterfeit money. But having said that, there are also several other more legitimate uses for the darknet, such as free library sites, news sites, social media sites, such as Facebook has a darknet version that people can log into in case they're being monitored by their home nation. It allows them to communicate with others, say, in a fully encrypted and protected environment.
Is it like a VPN? I'm familiar with the concept of a VPN where you can access something that's not necessarily available in your country by de-identifying your country.
To a certain extent, a virtual private network, a VPN, is an encrypted tunnel that allows you to communicate with someone point to point and doesn't allow for eavesdropping necessarily or anyone to intervene or interdict into that point-to-point communications. The darknet is much more complex because of the level of encryption. They call it the onion because you have these layers of encryption that basically are stripped away as you go through each node, which reveals them the next destination. Finally, it's the last node, the exit node, which points to the site that you're headed toward, that you're going to, and then you're allowed to connect. So in a certain perspective, from a privacy perspective, yes, it does operate similarly where people can't necessarily see where you're going or where you've come from. It's very difficult to track. And of course, within this ecosystem, this environment, there's chat, there's email, there are web services. There's a lot of the same services that we see on the surface net, but because they're encrypted, they're more secure and they're more difficult to track for users.
Is there somebody behind it, running it, making sure encryption is up to date? And who's profiting from this?
There's a not-for-profit organization that runs Tor and that basically helps maintain a lot of the standards, the software, the updates. These are mostly volunteers who work collaboratively because they are all about protecting privacy and protecting the rights of individuals globally. Now, yes, again, you might say, well, they're protecting criminals, but they are also protecting people who might otherwise not have access to internet content or might be tracked by their government and surveilled. Originally, this was created as an alternative encrypted means of communication for government employees. And as such, it was designed to provide that protected communications and access in, say, hostile countries where they would be monitored and surveilled. And this would allow them then to gain access either to specialized sites or to content that they might not normally be able to use while they were in that country.
But they have no desire or motivation to stop the criminal activity, or is it this, that the free speech and the free exposure to information outweighs any criminal activity that may come as a consequence of their encryption service?
You can ascribe to the idea that technology is not good or bad. Technology is neutral. How people apply that technology, how people use that technology can be used for good or evil. We've seen vehicles used for racing, commuting, getting us from one place to another, but also used to kill people and also drunk drivers. So again, that technology has both good and bad applications. There is a lot of criminal activity that occurs on the surface net. Social media sites and platforms are horrific, especially for child sexual exploitation, fraud, scams, theft, misrepresentation, disinformation, on and on and on and on. That doesn't necessarily make the internet bad. And it's very difficult to control that kind of content because the original intent was to create a free and open, uncontrolled, unregulated place where people could interact and communicate. And we see the same thing with the darknet. It naturally had to evolve toward criminal activities. And because of its structure, it naturally supports criminal activities. And it's very, very difficult to decide at what point technology is solely a bad thing and needs to be terminated or shut down, in which case, in this case, it would be very difficult to do so.
But accessing Tor is totally legal everywhere.
Absolutely. It's just a browser. It's an encrypted browser. And you can use Tor to access the regular surface net. In fact, I often encourage people to use Tor if they want to access sites that have information that might be illegal in their state or country because it anonymizes their access. So for instance, I think we'll talk about women seeking medical advice in the United States. The use of Tor helps protect their identity by going to those sites and retrieving the information without surveillance by the government or their internet service provider.
In terms of the dark net, if all these nefarious activities are going on, How have the police caught on, or are they always one step behind?
It's a challenge. And the reason it's a challenge for law enforcement is because a lot of the sites, the illicit marketplaces, are often hosted in countries that may not recognize the authority of investigators from Western nations or from organizations that are pursuing investigatory practices. They may not have extradition, or they may support the victimization of individuals in other countries. It's kind of the agreement that as long as you don't touch us, as long as you don't victimize our folks, you guys can do what you want. The internet writ large allows us global access. It allows us to misrepresent our location and who we are. And therefore, it's much more difficult from an enforcement and investigatory perspective for law enforcement to actually collect evidence and identify these perpetrators. And the perpetrators have also gotten very, very good at cyber tradecraft, at protecting their identities and resisting traditional investigatory efforts that you would expect to see with a normal investigation of identifying a perpetrator, collecting evidence, and then prosecuting.
What is the biggest sort of scam that's going on at the moment through the darknet?
Well, from a scam perspective, I'd say one of the most damaging is the sale of identity credentials. Stolen identities that are then used to construct what are called synthetic identities. So they have aspects of your true identity, but they can be used by bad guys to go and create lines of credit, to impersonate individuals, and to be able to misrepresent themselves as that individual to steal their bank accounts, their superannuation, take over their cell phones, and that is horribly problematic. I think that the other kind of scam that is problematic is the trade in malware and ransomware. It has leveled the playing ground for hackers and cyber criminals, where they no longer have to have the coding skills that they used to in order to develop malware and ransomware. Because what they now have is what's called ransomware as a service, where you can purchase its use, you can lease it, target a victim organization, collect the money, and then pay the original coder or provider. You can also contract specifically out for bots, for different kinds of malware, for denial of service attacks. It's basically a massive store capability, retail capability that allow non-skilled hackers to go after average persons on the surface net.
So how does that work when they're holding someone to ransom?
So what typically happens is someone will accidentally click on a hyperlink that will download malware, software, ransomware. They may inadvertently introduce a USB that's compromised. They may be visiting a site such as a gambling site or a shopping site that's either a clone of an authentic site or specifically designed to download malware. In all those cases, the malware locks the files, locks the folders, locks the computer of the individual who's been victimized. The individual then is treated with a banner saying, pay in cryptocurrency to this wallet address, or we will delete your files, or release your files to the public if they're sensitive, or you may never have access to these files again. In which case, if they don't have backups, that can be devastating for a small to medium business who loses all of its client data, its personal data, sales data, intellectual property, whatever it is that's being ransomed. And the ransomware perpetrators typically will collect the bounty or collect the funds from the victim and may or may not then unlock the files, may simply just delete them and take the money and go.
I assume that would be something a more organised group would be doing. But as you said, there can be little hackers sitting somewhere at a keyboard anywhere in the world.
There are organized ransomware groups, absolutely, who design, code, and then sell or use ransomware. But there are also individuals who have this capability to launch ransomware against an organization. And that's what I'm saying about leveling the playing field. Operating as an independent, even a newbie or a script kiddie, as they're called, may have the ability to simply purchase ransomware and then use it against a target and then victimize the organization. So again, the level of sophistication and skill doesn't necessarily need to be there. And that's very problematic.
And what are they using to purchase? Are they all using cryptocurrency?
By and large, yes. Either stolen credit cards or cryptocurrency.
But is that the currency on the dark net?
It is. In fact, the dark net, one of the first drug markets, Silk Road, was operational in the mid-2000s. And really, it wasn't until the nom de plume Satoshi Nakamoto created and implemented the concept of Bitcoin in about 2009 that the Silk market and other drug markets like that were able to operate successfully, because the anonymity of being able to purchase, buy and sell products on the darknet using a pseudonymous digital currency like Bitcoin really didn't exist prior to about 2009, 2010. Since then, cryptocurrency's taken off. And again, by and large, cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Ripple have all been used as methods of payment for products and services on the darknet.
Can you please explain to me how cryptocurrency works? To me, again, this is this nebulous concept. And the only way I can possibly try to imagine it is if you were buying a token or a gift card and using that then to do transactions, because nobody necessarily knows where the gift card came from. But there's an initial money deposit. So how on earth does cryptocurrency work, and what is it exactly?
So we're all familiar with cash. Cash is very anonymous. In other words, unless it's die-marked from stolen funds, cash is very anonymous, and it's a peer-to-peer payment process. I hand you money, and you give me a product or service. Translate that into a digital environment where a digital token, ones and zeros, can be transferred peer-to-peer from one person to another. And that transaction is approved through what's called a consensus mechanism, where a mathematical problem is solved and the transaction is approved. I directly send from my digital wallet, which is really just a address on the blockchain, to you, and you receive that cryptocurrency to your wallet address. A wallet doesn't actually store anything like a physical wallet. So it's too bad that they use that term, because really what it is, it's a public and private key, an asymmetric encryption algorithm, which means that my public key is my wallet address that I share with anybody. Anybody can send money to that address. I use my private key to approve a transaction. I keep that secret. I'm the only one who knows who my private key and my passphrase that allow those two things to pair that completes the transaction. So in that case, it's a little more complicated. The transaction's recorded on what's called a blockchain. The blockchain is nothing more than a transparent digital ledger. Think of an Excel spreadsheet published for the world to see and to be able to add transactions in and record all the transactions that occur with a specific cryptocurrency. The thing about this ledger is it can't be changed or altered. Once it's there, the only way to reverse a transfer of cryptocurrency is by doing a new transfer, bringing the cryptocurrency back to me, which is problematic from a fraud perspective. But from the ledger's perspective, it has an indelible record of all the transactions that occurred from one wallet to another wallet or a series of wallets. Again, ones and zeros that are merely recorded within this ledger. That address shows that you received or sent a certain amount of cryptocurrency. And that's really how it works. The difference, though, with cash is it's not readily accepted everywhere. It's not backed by the government or any government. It is reliant solely on its scarcity, its availability, and someone's willingness to accept it.
Do they then circumvent bank fees in the process?
Yeah, there are transaction fees, but they're very, very small for processing cryptocurrencies. Now, from the perspective of privacy and surveillance, we've gotten to an era where I can't pay you directly. It's become very, very difficult for me to pay you directly unless I physically go to your location and hand you the cash. If you think about where we've gone, it's corporations paying one another. My bank pays your bank. And then if we go to an ATM, we can pull the cash out. But again, banks are limiting cash withdrawals. They're limiting cash transactions. They're limiting our ability to actually use cash if we want to buy expensive items. And it's because of us moving to a cashless society. Instead, we're required to go through organizations and corporations who, of course, take their cut when we purchase any item. Even buying coffee and doing a tap and pay, it has to be the ACH, Automated Clearinghouse, who controls the credit transfer. If the bank issues the credit card, the bank guarantees my funds, transfers it to your bank, and then deposits it. And of course, there's a transaction fee that either the vendor pays or we pay. It's difficult to buy things now with cash. And I think because of that, we're also seeing increased surveillance of what we buy. You look at your ledger in your bank account. Everything you do has purchase history. What you buy, where you buy it, what you do with your money is absolutely monitored and controlled by both corporations as well potentially by the government if they want to do a deep dive into your transaction history. I don't want to say the fringe, but the privacy conscious sector of our population is aware of this issue and therefore is reluctant to use conventional payment systems when something like Bitcoin or other traditional cryptocurrencies can be used in a more discreet manner, a more pseudonymous manner.
So in some ways, has the surveillance of individuals created this mass movement of people who are avoiding being surveilled?
It has. If you look within some of the community, I spent a lot of time on Reddit, and I love going out to seeing the different subreddit communities. And I also spent time on other forums as well. And you see that there is a concern of the decreasing amount of privacy. And cryptocurrency certainly fills that niche. But then as a result, what we've seen is governments increasingly try to regulate cryptocurrency use. We're seeing central banks, such as the Bank of Australia, looking at creating a central bank digital currency of its own because the transactions are more rapid. There's a transparent digital ledger, and it then is able to surveil and control the transactions that occur in the digital environment. So if it supplants Bitcoin as we move forward into a cashless society, which if you look at the news reports, you see that that is the intent within Australia, is to move to a cashless society. The issuance of a digital currency by central banks solves that pseudonymity problem. It solves the ATO's problem of being unable to track transactions and earnings and investments. And it creates an environment, again, where we're going back to a more surveilled economy, which is problematic for a lot of people.
How do criminals then capitalize on the anti-privacy aspects? Who's drawn to it, to criminal activity, particularly with cryptocurrencies? Imagine organised crime, it'd be a great way to launder money. How does that work and who's drawn to it?
Again, the fringe ranges. From a bad guy perspective, we've seen terrorists use cryptocurrency for donations, for training, for recruitment. Criminals use it to profit. The biggest problem with cryptocurrency is the ability to convert it, cash out, to fiat currency. That is a major challenge for criminals and for users of cryptocurrency.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't understand what that was.
Getting a Bitcoin and actually converting a Bitcoin into 57,000 Australian dollars. How do you do that? There's only a few ways, and it's very difficult. And that's typically where, again, you have this ecosystem has to interact with a conventional financial ecosystem, which means I have to go either through an exchange to cash out, in which case they're going to record the transaction and report the transaction to ATO, or I can try to sell it to an individual, including the darknet, for cash, and they will send me cash in the mail. In some cases, they will try to buy what's called dirty cash. That's money that's been stolen prior to destruction, or that is drug money or ill-gotten gains, and it's their method of laundering. So cashing out that way, or simply converting it into other goods and services, artwork, jewelry, rare coins, vehicles, real estate. Those are other ways to cash out as well. So this is one of the biggest challenges, I think, that kind of confounds criminals to a certain extent, unless they have developed a specific mechanism or process wherein they can use cryptocurrencies to their advantage. Why they're drawn to it, again, there's the pseudonymity aspect of it. It's easier to process these types of ill-gotten gains when you're selling drugs or weapons or even identity credentials, and being able to get this payment process. But then the challenge for them is, again, cashing out, converting it into spendable fiat currency.
What do investigators do when they're looking at a criminal network using cryptocurrency? How on earth do they begin to investigate, and what's the process they use?
There's a few companies obviously created a niche environment that can track wallet-to-wallet cryptocurrency transactions using specialized software. From a very basic level, remember, this is a transparent ledger that anybody can view. So you can go out to blockchain.info and actually see transactions and track transactions from wallet to wallet, including your own. But obviously, there are millions of transactions occurring every day. And so being able to track very specific transactions can be problematic. So companies like Chainalysis, Elliptic have all developed software capabilities to do point-to-point tracking and be able to track the transactions across the various wallets. Law enforcement and government agencies interested in tracking cryptocurrency transfers have typically contracted with these companies to assist them with the investigative process. There's also quite a bit of training now that's available to law enforcement to understand how cryptocurrency works, how to do investigatory processes, how to actually track cryptocurrency transfers from wallet to wallet. And as a result, there is a fairly good environment developing for law enforcement and intelligence to be able to track these types of cryptocurrency exchanges or transfers, even down to where we're looking at, North Korea is probably the largest cryptocurrency thief and launderer in the world, funding half of their ballistic missile program last year with stolen cryptocurrency. And, tracking those transactions through different exchanges has become, very much of an intelligence project for a lot of nations. And they're very good at it.
So are the North Korean government actually scamming individuals around the world as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're very good at social engineering exchanges, going in, pretending to be someone else, misrepresenting themselves, impersonating somebody, and able to then elevate their privileges and gain access and then transfer cryptocurrencies out. They are expert at that. And that's, by and large, the most effective approach that they've taken with various exchanges who've been victimized over the last several years.
Can you give us an example of a criminal investigation that's led to prosecutions?
There are very few, unfortunately. The law enforcement community has been very good at targeting specific marketplace dealers. Probably the most famous is Ross Ulbricht, who was running Silk Road. He was basically given life in prison for running the Silk Road marketplace. Although there were other charges levied against him, such as hiring hitman, laundering funds, selling illicit products, that's probably been one of the most famous or well-known cases where someone really operating on the darknet side and then using cryptocurrency to buy and sell products has been prosecuted. It's unfortunate that I see a lot of scams locally. I met with someone who lost over, I think it was $80,000 of her superannuation to what's called a cryptocurrency investment scam. These scams typically involve, I can give you an increase in your cryptocurrency return, send me your money, I will purchase cryptocurrency for you, hold it in the wallet, and then you will basically yield a huge profit when the market upturns. She transferred her funds to cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrency then was transferred away. And what typically happens is they'll walk them through the process of buying Bitcoin. So they'll legitimately purchase cryptocurrency, maybe through an exchange, and then transfer from wallet to the perpetrator. The perpetrator then within seconds often will transfer out that cryptocurrency into other wallets and then aggregate all of their cryptocurrencies together and then continue to move them so it's more difficult to track. So again, the problem here is she's purchased the cryptocurrency legitimately, so there's been a legitimate exchange, so the money can't be refunded. The cryptocurrency, however, has been transferred to the perpetrator. Once it's transferred, it's gone. It can't be reversed. It can't be seized unless law enforcement immediately identifies that wallet and can shut it down, which is very difficult if it's held individually. And then as a result, because it's spread probably overseas to multiple wallets, almost impossible to trace or to pull back.
So there's no recourse for that victim?
She's out. Yeah. She's out. And I see this time and again with people who think they're investing in cryptocurrency. They'll even go to what looks like a legitimate website and then purchase cryptocurrency using their savings, using a credit card, whatever means that they're using. And then it's gone.
We have a surveillance, basically society. And we're very trusting of our phones, signing up for apps, games, anything. We'll often click on things on TikTok, Facebook. Everybody downloads everything. So I think we're all vulnerable all the time. But there's a particular group that I think is alarmingly vulnerable. And it's women in the US, in states in which abortion is illegal. And it's not enough that that's considered illegal. There are some jurisdictions that are actually using, we call them spyware, for want of any other word, to track these women. And as I understand it, one of the most popular apps, one of the top 3, I think, apps in the world to download is a period tracking app. So unsuspecting women could actually find themselves in a criminal investigation in certain states, particularly in the United States, and no doubt in other areas as well. How is that working? How are women becoming victims of criminal investigations for possibly murder through things like these apps and spyware?
Yeah, the surveillance economy is a great term. I really like that description of what we're facing. Data aggregators have been collecting information on us for decades. I used to work with the data aggregators. Specifically, a data aggregator purchases information from your credit history, your utilities, your transactions, mortgage, house payments, anything that is transactional in nature, including now social media, harvests all of this data, aggregates it, performs what's called identity resolution to narrow the focus down to one individual, and then makes it available for resale, package and resale. Governments are able to purchase this. Now, they often are accused of doing surveillance in and of themselves. And the reality is governments don't often surveil its own citizens, except as a preventative measure or as an investigative measure if there was a crime or an act. But constant, real-time, long-term surveillance generally is just too expensive, too manpower intensive, and too difficult to do. So the alternative then is if you have an interest in an individual, you can purchase aggregated data sets. You also can go to an internet service provider and seek access into applications that are resident on a cell phone, a smartphone. The ability to go directly to the provider allows you then to see locations, activities, usage, there's a laundry list of information that can also be obtained and used, not necessarily for legitimate investigative reasons. What we're seeing is the politicization of things that traditionally we viewed as being data privacy oriented. What I buy, where I buy it, whom I make a donation to, whether or not I sign a petition online, and that politicization of these different types of activities to include seeking healthcare, seeking an abortion, or even just information about birth control has become politicized. And it's unfortunate then that based on certain laws that have been passed in various states in the United States, showing a mere interest in accessing a women's healthcare clinic or tracking your menstrual cycle or seeking advice on abortion now has become the subject of law enforcement interest. As a result, the ability then to monitor women of childbearing age and their activities to include geolocation surveillance, that is tracking the device, and if it goes across a state line, or what's called geofencing, if it goes near an abortion clinic or women's healthcare clinic, the ability to then reverse engineer or reverse identify the owner of that phone has become pretty easy. This is problematic for a lot of reasons. Obviously, denying basic healthcare to women is a great concern. And it was of such concern that I once wrote an article for The Conversation on how women can avoid surveillance by law enforcement to basically exercise their constitutional rights to seek healthcare or express their First Amendment rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. And as a result, that then turned into a book on espionage, on teaching civilians tradecraft. And obviously, I spent years and years and years in the government learning tradecraft, physical tradecraft, learning surveillance, learning cyber tradecraft, and practicing it on my day-to-day basis for the various agencies I work for. I think it's important that civilians understand that they don't have to give up their privacy. If they are engaged in legitimate, constitutionally guaranteed activities, that they have the right not to be mistreated or abused by law enforcement and intelligence, and they have the right to exercise basic human rights. There are stories now of individuals who are being approached by law enforcement in Florida who have signed a petition to allow abortion. They're against the laws that are being passed in these various states, and they're being verified, identities verified by law enforcement. So there's a series of measures that pretty much anybody can do to help improve their privacy and reduce the likelihood of surveillance. We already talked about Tor. We talked about the use of a virtual private network, a VPN. There are email applications like Proton Mail that are encrypted that can be used. The servers are held outside of Australia and outside of the United States, and they can be used for encrypted communications, for instance, between a woman and maybe a doctor, or a woman and someone who she's seeking advice from. The use of the privacy settings in Firefox has very good anonymous type settings that you can reconfigure to prevent tracking. The use of certain applications like CCleaner to eliminate cookies, to eliminate internet history, surfing history, and to clean your browser. If you're going to communicate with someone, I encourage people to go to one of the local grocery stores and buy a cheap phone, or you can order them from China through a couple of stores like AliExpress. Go then and get a SIM card locally, pay month to month, so that if you go someplace or if you're communicating, you can use that burner phone, they're called, so as not to divulge your identity or give away excessive information or associate it with other activities. Use a rental car instead of your own personal vehicle. Not perfect, but it conceals your home address from observation and collection, which is nice. Yes, they'll have to go through and serve a search warrant to a rental company to get the renter information. It makes it more challenging, more difficult. And the civilian groups who are tracking individuals, it makes it much more difficult for them then to track individuals. Use stored value cards. I keep a bunch of these all the time. Basically, they're Visa cards, gift cards, where you can use those to pay for things instead of using your regular credit cards. Again, eliminates the geolocation tracking of where you've been and what you've done.
For women who think they're under surveillance, this is a way they can protect themselves.
Or even stalkers from former partners or cyberbullies. Absolutely.
What do you say to people who say privacy doesn't matter unless you're doing something that you definitely shouldn't be doing? And if you don't want the world to know it, don't do it in the first place.
People often confuse privacy with secrecy. Privacy and security are part of who we are as human beings. I often hear that agreement. I've done nothing wrong, then why would I care if anybody were watching me or paying attention to what I do? From a theft and fraud perspective, from a criminality perspective, that same information is collected by bad guys to defraud you, to steal your identity, to threaten you, to sextort you, or to misuse your image, information, voice, or data to their profit or benefit. The other is governments change, laws change. We see this constantly. What might be legal this week may not be legal next week. Data is forever. Once you put something out on the internet, it's there. Once you store data with your internet service provider, it's there. Once it's been aggregated, once it's been associated with you, there's no going back. Now, when I talk to young persons about going into the intelligence field, the question, well, hey, I got arrested, or I was drunk in public and there's photos of me, or hey, I was doing these drugs during this time frame. Can I still get a job? Is there a future for me still in these fields? And again, the people our age who are used to, having this type of exposure, hey, the things that we did in youth, people have forgotten about. Well, the people today of youth, if you do something in a public environment and somebody has a photo of it, it does not go away. It's there forever. And once you've posted it on a social media platform, or somebody else has posted it on a social media platform, or the data's been collected and aggregated, it's there and will follow you literally the rest of your life. And it's not necessarily about doing something wrong. It's about how the data is used, by whom, in what context, and its persistence. And that's where the concern lies. Because again, governments change, laws change, and circumstances change as we grow older. And therefore, maintaining a level of privacy and security is incredibly important to ensuring your own personal security, but also the security of your family and your friends.
Dennis, thank you so much for talking to us. This is way less of a black hole than I thought it was. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Crime Insiders Forensics is a LiSTNR original production. It's hosted by me, Catherine Fox, and produced by Holly Mitchell and Ed Gooden. Executive producer is Dan Mullins. Sound design and imaging is by Link Kelly.